Who I am.
Welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on Zoom tonight. And we're really hoping nobody tried to make the trip to UCL, because in respect of the strike action by the UCU lecturers, we thought it was the wrong thing to do to try and use the UCL seminar room. So we're here on Zoom. And we've got something a bit special and exciting tonight. It may have scared a few people off with its provocative title, How to Run a Brothel. But this workshop has a certain history to it, and it's a very interesting thought experiment. Professor Chris Knight, who is the founder of RAG, is going to be guiding us through. But there are people here who are old hands who may be able to help and chip in. And we'll see, just depending. We're going to maybe do breakout room, have a couple of smaller workshops, so you can have a bit of discussion on this workshop amongst yourselves. Chris, do you want to start?
Okay, yes. It is a deliberately provocative title, How to Run a Brothel. But the reason for choosing that title is to kind of get out of moralizing and invite all of you who are interested in the topic of early human kinship. Was it matolocal? Was it patrilocal? Did children know who their father was? So all those issues about human kinship. The reason for choosing this title is to get you to just dispassionately think about whether prostitution is even vaguely possible without money. And the reason why that actually is an issue, you might think, well, it's not even an issue. It's just a no-brainer. What on earth are people talking about? You know, prostitution is sort of a factor in human origins. The trouble is that in the 80s, when I was writing my book, I kept discovering that Darwinian theorists, mostly who call themselves sociobiologists, and I use that term completely neutrally. There's nothing wrong with being, a biologist and studying social life. But again and again, there was this, what I felt was just kind of grotesque misconstrual. And let me just tell you what the misconstrual is. Hunter-gatherers, egalitarian hunter-gatherers, or immediate return hunter-gatherers, the kind of people we were when we first became human, without storage, they don't have marriage. Instead, the system, which is partly a sexual system and partly an economic system, and I'm sure many of you know this, but I'll just repeat it all, the technical term for it is bride service. And that means when a young man fancies a young woman, he's going to prove himself to her mum and her relatives to be a generous, good-humored, kind, sensitive, but above all, effective hunter. And if he proves himself to be useless or lazy or idle or selfish, what will happen is that his relationship that he might have begun with this young woman will be ended pretty sharp. Ended by her mum, by her brothers, perhaps, by her and by herself. Women just don't want useless husbands or useless. The word husband isn't even quite correct, because with bride service, it's as if you're kind of going to get married, but the actual wedding never happens. So a man could be visiting his loved one, usually at first, at any rate, in her own mother's camp. And he's got to be providing meat. And the trouble is that because he provides meat and he won't get any sex unless he does, this was interpreted as meat for sex, or sex for meat. Women provide sex in order to get a material reward, namely meat. And I suppose, given that in the West, I mean, we don't have too many models of kinship structure and links between economics and sex to go on. We have what we know of in our own culture. Again and again and again, I found that what was called the sex for meat system, the sex for meat exchange, was prostitution. And quite often, because the authors were thinking of it as prostitution, they were very cautious about it, didn't want to talk about it too much, felt a bit guilty about accusing hunter-gatherers of being prostitutes. And the whole issue was just grotesquely kind of messed up by Western assumptions and Western ideology. So the whole point of this how to run a brothel workshop is for all of you here in RAG to just kind of work out for yourselves what is actually going on, because there's no question that there is a connection between sex and economics. There's no question that with hunter-gatherers, the men do provide meat, and there's no question that if they end up not, being no use, and when I say being no use, I mean they're going to be no use whatever. I mean, a young man doesn't have to be himself a brilliant hunter. He can easily be part of a hunting team, but as long as he's useful and the meat somehow gets to the woman and her kin, then he's got a good chance of maintaining his relationship. But the point is that he's got to carry on and carry on and carry on being useful, making himself useful. And in many immediate return hunter-gatherers, there's never a time, this is the critical point, where that young man gains conjugal rights in his wife. He can't say, right, I've helped you for so long that I've now got like rights, marital rights, conjugal rights in you. That will never happen. At no time does a man have that, because there's no wedding. When two people get together, there's maybe a little bit of a sort of informal celebration or something goes on. I mean, certainly the girl's mother will know all about it, and the young man will be given probably a bit of a drubbing if Jerome Lewis's experiences are anything to go by. But the big rituals are not weddings; they're initiation rites. So this workshop is designed to ask a number of questions, and is designed to help you just work out for yourself kind of what's going on, what's the most likely outcome of a system where, after all, we have to, with any mammals, and we're mammals clearly, the female of the species does a hell of a lot more work getting the future generations up and running than the male needs to do, because females get pregnant and with mammals, of course, do the breastfeeding as well. And somehow females will benefit. Maybe not, they don't have to have a man around. Maybe they can do do okay as a single mum, hopefully with their own mother and sisters and so on. But a woman who manages to get additional help from a young hunter would probably do better in terms of being able to care for her kids. Is that enough as a way of an introduction? At some point, I want to read out a lovely series of passages from a wonderful book by Janet Siskine called To Hunt in the Morning. But maybe it would be best to leave that a little bit later and just get down to business with the workshop. Has everyone got the workshop questions? Is everyone all right with that? No one's saying they haven't.
Accessible in the chat by a link or by a copy. Yeah.
So
no, I don't think I got them. Okay.
No, I haven't got
in the chat, there is a link to Google Drive that you should be able to find if you press that link.
So if you press that link, up should come How to Run a Brothel, an Early Kinship Thought Experiment. And with any luck, if you just go through these questions, you'll be kind of impressed, because what you'll come up with is, however much you try to make it into a brothel, it just will not work. And what you've got is what, in my own view, is probably the most moral system of kinship and economics that there ever was. And actually the origin of morality is somewhere in the answer to these questions. So how do we do this? Are we going to...
Well, is everybody confident they've got access to the link?
I haven't got access to it. I can't see it in the chat for some reason.
No, me neither.
If you go right to the top, you can see the actual workshop. And then below it, Chris has a link.
So at the very top of the chat.
Drive. I can do it again. I can copy it and redo it
in the chat, after all those lines.
Oh no, I've just done the brothel one again. That's the actual copy. And then I'm going to try and copy Chris's.
Oh, I've got it, yeah.
Chris's Google Drive.
Yeah.
And what we were going to do, because we've got nearly 30 people, is do a couple of smaller workshops.
So is that what we want to do? We want to break into workshops.
Well, does that make sense? Because we got 25 people, I'd make about 12, 13 people in each.
All right, so I'm going to go to breakout rooms. I'll click this, breakout rooms.
Breakout rooms, just randomly assign people, and And we'll make about 15 minutes or 20 minutes. We'll see how.
Two breakout rooms, right? I'm going to create them, assign automatically, create, okay, open all rooms, is that right? Room 2, room, okay, open all rooms.
So you should get a join in. Great. Chris will go in the other one.
Okay.
And why are they unassigned? Assigned to. Chris. Chris isn't anywhere. I think it's good. Okay. Hello. In the chat. Can't hear him. Host is broadcasting, but I can't hear him.
It's funny, we're cut off now, aren't we? From
Yeah, we are, but that may be good.
maybe it's. I wonder if that's what happened last time. Maybe we do go into a.
The breakout week. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think Chris can choose whether to speak in or not, and maybe we're silenced, which is fine. Have we got, how many people have we got? 8, just 9?
Looks
Why
like
have we got so few?
I think
There's
we're
one-
already in breakout rooms.
We are, yeah. So I think we can start, and I'm not going to tell the story. I want people to work it out themselves. So, but just everybody's got the notes, and I'm just that's just somebody who keeps coming in and out. Everyone's got the notes. Everyone understands the situation. So yeah, just work down the questions and see what comes to mind.
Right. It's a successful family business. I love that.
The only rules here are Darwinism. That is, you survive and reproduce. Those are the only principles here. So yeah, it's a family business, and you pass it down to the next generation.
So there's no other workaround. Money is yet not invented. Predict the moral system. No, wasn't just Darwin fitness. Okay, so let's see. So what's our capital? What do people think about capital? Could it be, I suppose we are the capital, the women or the workers, could you say?
Who are the workers? Does everybody want to unmute? So, because it would be great if we can hear participation for this. It'd be great. It'd be nice. Does anybody have other suggestions on capital? Leoncia is saying, who are the workers? Would be the women. Any more suggestions? Does everybody agree?
Would the capital be the fertile women?
Okay, well, what about that? Do we actually think fertile women? Those are the main.
Because I would think that the older women who are running the brothel per se and limiting the limiting access would be managing things, while it would actually be the fertility and the joy of sex, you know, that are driving, that are your actual capital, is, you know, your capital is sex, basically, you know, whether it's for pleasure or for reproduction.
Yeah.
Or the workers who are providing.
Well, one could say that the managers are also doing something and are part of the system, right? Because they're managing other people, they're managing the male access in many ways, right? But the capital.
Can I just
is
say,
the fertility.
I wanted you to start with the idea of you running a brothel. I mean, precisely because if you don't start with that idea, you're kind of not going to get out of it. But I want you to start and be fairly consistent about that being the assumption, and then ask the different questions. But of course, there's no money. There's just hunting and gathering. So you've got human beings, males, females, older, younger, and you've got food, gathered food and meat food. And then you've got to somehow make it work. And then think of the different questions. What is your capital?
Is
So-
the physical environment also capital? The physical
Sorry,
environment
say again.
is the physical environment and keeping that nice to attract people and make sure also part of the capital, also skills passed on.
All right. Well, these are interesting ideas. Those conform to ideas of embodied capital, which are thought about the skills that you acquire as you grow up, and also maybe your nice cave, your nice warm cave might be a capital. I agree, but I think the idea that it's women, and especially fertile women, is quite a promising one.
Right.
But anybody other thoughts? Should we try and go down?
To some degree, the capital is also social power, right? There's a social, I mean, that goes along with the fertility. So, I mean, the part of the capital is the social power that's bound up with being able to offer the chance of sex.
Right. Okay. So it's a slightly vague and abstract concept. I want to be as materialistic and
And don't forget the second line. It's a
physical as
successful family business. You've got to
Yeah, it's a
still be
business.
around in the future.
it's a
So there's
business.
obviously going to be some babies coming into play, because otherwise it won't be successful in a generation or so. You won't exist anymore. So that's another condition which you've got to think about. You've got to be children, and some women are going to be pregnant, breastfeeding, and all that stuff, and men going through different phases of their lives. Yeah.
So you'd have to have some kind of childcare with the. I like the idea of having the older women running. I think that would work out.
Can I just say, in room 2, is it all right for me to talk to all of you? Almost everyone's mute. Amy's mute, Alice is mute, Karen Thomas is mute,
well,
Jacob's
tell them
mute,
they're not
everyone's
meant to be
mute.
mute.
How's that going to work?
Come on.
Because
Well,
we
Camilla
unmute
asked
as we
us
talk.
I encourage them to unmute.
Yeah.
People also mute when they're not
Encourage.
talking because it creates feedback and things. So, I mean, I don't think people being muted is necessary.
Also. Who do you employ?
I mean, if people don't want to participate, but let's just encourage as many as possible. What about this preserving and defending? Yeah, we're getting towards a kind of cooperative childcare idea, with maybe older women and grandmothers being, very important in the management, and the younger fertile women kind of being the capital. But what about preserving and defending?
In that case, you also have you would have the older women, the mothers bringing up the boy children, and in some ways teaching them how the system works, at least in the earlier days, right, before they go off and become independent. So part of the capital, once again, is the social power, right, that women have in that situation to define the terms in some ways.
Okay, so who exactly are these? They're males, they're men, they're younger men. Who exactly are they going to be in relationship to different generations of women?
Well, they're going to be sons, aren't they, to all of the women, I suppose. And
to all of the women, but for some of the women,
to the fertile women. Is there going to be? There's going to be brothers, right? There's going to be brothers, and there's going to be. Oh my gosh. I mean, because there's going to be babies, and they're going to be all related to the women who are working. Sorry, I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, Irene was making an important point, didn't she? I mean, you have to think, defense against what? I mean, it could be against lions, but it could, of course, be against other humans.
Yes.
In which case, you're going to think which
Defense
other humans
against
might be
hate.
the most sort of dangerous that you need to defend against. In which case, kind of who's defending against who, and so on. So, I mean,
Yeah, it's got to be the men.
You
Preserving.
definitely want some men.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got examples in ethnography, like the Elima house, where older mums and aunties are sort of the guards outside. But so you want to have
just
some.
ask Camilla. Camilla, do you think this is working? Because I mean, usually we do this at UCL around a table, and it all seems to work brilliantly. People have a good old time about it, kind of laugh about it, and get to places. What do you think? I'm not sure this is working on Zoom.
Or maybe in the bigger group, unless we're
Camilla,
all
are you
together,
there?
maybe.
Well, we can close the breakouts and bring it back and see what everyone has. Just close the rooms.
It is fun to do. It is quite an
Yeah,
interesting
I think it is
exercise.
fun, yeah. but there's too many people who don't feel able to speak, so maybe it's better to have a bigger group.
Yeah. I mean, it's okay not to know and to get it wrong, because that's what I don't mainly do all the time. So.
There aren't necessarily right answers. It's
Yeah.
about thinking it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Or thinking about the different possibilities and parameters.
Sure.
Is how it is. Because already, we've been thinking, well, are these men, are they sons? Are they brothers?
Yeah.
Or would the brothers leave? Or what? How is this system working?
Yeah, exactly.
So the breakout rooms are going to close in less than a minute. So we're going to go back to the big group.
Okay.
And you can think about the next question about if we agree that we've got to have some men involved in defense, and we think there's sons and brothers at least.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very pleased is nobody has said the girls' husbands, because that is pretty much the wrong answer. It's not men defending their women.
No, no, definitely not. Okay.
It's not how it works. But how are we going to advertise? So we're just about, well, we can actually leave the breakout room already and go back.
Right. Now, are we all together? Have we all come back?
They're coming back. They're coming back. I've got 23 people now.
Now, my own view is that this works very well face to face in a room with tables and people wandering around and having a chat. And as far as I can see, there's far too many people not wanting to be part of it.
Well, it's not that, Chris. It may be because their lines, it may not be able to speak and so on. So
all I'm saying is they're muted. So whether they've been muted by somebody else or they're muted themselves, the fact is that it can't work with half the people muted, really. I mean, of course, there's still half the people are muted, even now. I don't quite know what to do about it. You can't really have a workshop if everyone's muted. Any chance everyone can sort of unmute?
We don't want to unmute all at once. We want to unmute when we talk.
Okay, fair enough, as long as you do.
That's true.
There is voice return. This is why we mute ourselves. There is voice return. So it will be a really, really bad sound if we don't mute ourselves while we don't speak.
Yeah, I see. Okay, it would be too much noise. So Camilla?
Yeah.
Can I suggest we just sort of go through this in a discursive way?
How far did everybody get down there? Because we got through the capital and preservation and defending it.
Right. Okay. What was
the other group?
Camilla,
the same, yes.
Would one of you tell us what happened with that question? Then those two questions.
Oh, God.
I'll let Leoncia do it. Not me.
Sure. So I was just reading the chat there. Margaret hasn't got the questions. Oh, there they go. They go in the chat again. Great. Thanks, Jacob. So the next one was how to advertise. That's where we got, didn't we, in our group?
Can we just recap, Leoncia, what we thought the answer to the first two were, or what our thinking was?
The capital were the women, the fertile women. I've forgotten the lady who was joining us, who was very good in our group.
Lucinda, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm opinionated.
We were talking about the older women as management and a kind of cooperative childcare thing. And the defence, who was doing that?
It was, I think it was for childcare, there was the older women, and also for some of the defence, the older women, and some of the men. And then we kind of thought about who those men would be, sons, brothers, and then we needed to think a bit more about how it might work after that.
And I think
in matriarchal societies, it's usually women have training in defending themselves, but also the young ones, especially those that don't have, let's say, so many caring responsibilities yet. They also have, responsibilities for defending the community. So in some societies where women, are equal to men, so women are also part of the defense. They don't expect men actually to do it.
Yes, I'd agree there too, because part of that comes down to who has social power. So in a matriarchal society, women have a lot of social power, especially older women. So there'd be a level of, it's not necessarily, defense isn't necessarily always physical. It can also be about, who gets excluded from a group or excluded from resources and all of those kinds of things. So it doesn't always have to be physical power. It can also be social power that's being used to defend people. And of course, there can be layers of defense as well, from the sort of interior layers, it's intergroup, and then outgroup, and then protecting against outgroups as well, which would involve everyone, I would think, especially the males.
Yeah. Can I just say, these questions are deliberately appalling. The word capital, the word advertising, all these, the punters, all that, the words are deliberately as far removed as you could possibly get from a matrilineal, matrilocal, hunter-gatherer society, just in order to kind of, work out why those concepts kind of don't work. But I still think we should sort of start with them, and not, for example, just assume we've got a matriarchal society, because that thing about no moral assumptions, just Darwinian fitness. The critical thing is that the group have got to survive. They're going to continue to exist in a few generations' time. I totally agree with Lucinda. I think it's going to be women having a lot of power. There's no question about that. Nothing else is really going to work. But somehow we've got to not make that an initial assumption. It's got to be one of the consequences of working it all kind of out. So, for example, yes, as everyone sort of agreed that realistically, this isn't going to be an institution where you've got lots of very sexy, lovely, handsome-looking men, and women are coming along and paying for sex with these men who are the capital. Is everyone pretty sure that, being realistic, it's more likely to be the other way around? It's going to be the women are the capital, and it's going to be the men who are going to be the, if you like, the punters. That's good. I think everyone might agree to that.
I think in a capitalist society, that's not necessarily true. But when we're talking about a less capitalist society, that is definitely true, because it's a sex becomes very different commodity within those contexts.
Yeah, Lucinda, you're really very, all pistons firing in your brain. It's fantastic. That's great. So this horrible word advertising. Obviously, what do we do?
Hang on, we didn't quite get past the defense bit, because you've got to think a little bit harder about, is this actually just women defending women? What about if the punters, we've got to keep this establishment fairly orderly, and we've got punters that are coming in and taking advantage or not actually producing the goods necessarily. And are we just going to leave it to the grandma to do the defending? Who else is there who can do defending?
Well, I thought the sons, obviously.
Yep, sons of who?
I think I would say that any of the men could be defenders if it's a situation where the men are in control of the women and are actually the benefactors of it all, right? In a patriarchal society, you have a situation where the men are exploiting the women, not necessarily for fertility reasons, but for many other reasons as well, where it's men using women as social capital with other men. And that becomes an entirely different dynamic than when it's then in a matrilineal society. That's why I'm bringing that up, because I just think those two things.
But can we imagine? But can we imagine just an evolutionary situation without imposing either patriarchy or matriarchy? Like it's a family business.
Yeah,
John?
I mean,
families are
sons are quite fond of their mothers. I mean, they're the obvious group for mothers to employ.
Yeah.
Well done, Don. Well done, John. I think that's incontrovertible. I think mothers have got extra, just in case some of the punters throw their weight around, and it's obviously a possibility, isn't it? Men are men, and they, one thing that women aren't quite so good at as men is violence. Men are usually better at that, and so women may need occasionally to stop any violence on the part of, as Camilla says, punters that aren't putting their weight, just want more sex on the cheap kind of thing. And as John says, to me, it's a no-brainer that women have sons and younger brothers, and they're fond of their mothers and older sisters for all kinds of reasons of dependence and experience. And it's pretty clear, it'd be crazy for the women not to draw on those men as a resource for defense, yes. And then the question comes in, who do you employ for security, and who are the punters? They're not going to be the brothers.
Well, we were, hang on, we didn't do advertise.
Okay.
We didn't do advertise.
Sorry, Camilla.
We
What
got
about that?
advertising.
Sorry, Camilla. Quite right. Yeah.
We had dances.
Thank you, John. That's obviously, when you think about it, hunter-gatherers are constantly dancing, and the women just love dancing, and their dancing is pretty provocative and pretty sexy, and women have a huge sort of joy in participating in each other's attractions during these dances. So so when it says here, how do you advertise? I mean, it seems, again, we have a terrible danger of falling into wretched conventions. But I mean, it's not going to be the old grannies who are going to be the central center stage of the dancing. There'll be management more likely, and it won't be very young children either. So it'll be the girls who are most attractive who will be central to the dancing. But the critical point is with hunter-gatherers, everyone participates in that. It's not a competitive thing. All the other women take pride in their sexy dancing and share it all and benefit from it all, because you need to be able to attract these men. Otherwise, the whole system falls apart. The men are going to be, precisely because there's no money, there's going to be some other incentive to go hunting.
Are there any other thoughts about venues at which the advertising might take place, or who would be advertised especially?
Well, in some societies, it is women advertising other women. It's one of the funniest things, because I have seen this in the UK, in women's circles. And they are advertising other women, and they're also advertising their sons or their brothers to the women's circle. So it seems that the advertising is taking place in women's spaces first, and then women, they try, let's say, to transfer the information, like, I have a good deal for you on both sides. So they also work between the groups of men and women as well. So it is women among themselves, and then women working between the two groups. And they are doing very good work. They're very smart. They're very fun, of course.
You've got two groups. Where did the two groups come from? Where did that happen? We've got a brothel. We started with a brothel.
I don't assume two groups for our hypothetical case. I have seen the two groups because in the societies where women have power and they also do the advertising, they have separate spaces let's say the boundaries are not completely, let's say, sound, but there are separate spaces and separate times. And I'm talking about, let's say, societies in Europe, for example, like UK. UK is a good example because the last years I have seen a lot that I couldn't have imagined.
Irene, we're trying not to do that. We're trying not to start with UK or Greek or some other place where you've got a brothel. We're trying to sort of.
Because you asked how women will do how the advertising is taking place. Well, I'm bringing information from real life. The women are doing the advertising actually. Men are not good at that anyway.
All right. Okay.
Okay. There may be something to it, but at the moment I like John's dancing as a really great idea, because it's kind of what, if not graphically, what might happen. I'm thinking of the Hadza, I'm thinking of the Mbuti, the girls of the Alima hut in the Mbuti, they're all singing inside the hut, and then they come bursting out, all painted, beautifully painted. So I'm thinking, well, actually, pubescent girls all painted and for their first menstruation rituals would be a pretty good place to advertise as well. Possibly.
So who do you employ for security? I mean, again, John said sons, brothers, and I'd like to move really quickly from there, if we all agree on that. I mean, clearly women can defend themselves, but I mean, you know, if against male violence, you probably want your sons and brothers as an extra defense. But then who must always be refused sex? Now, at the very beginning, it said no moral assumptions. So I don't want us to start.
We want punter, Chris, we got punters. We need to talk about punters.
Who are the punters? All right, okay.
You keep skipping a question.
Okay. Quite right. Sorry, Camilla, you're right. Who are the punters? Are the brothers going to be punters? Are your sons going to be punters?
No, they're somebody else's brothers.
Somebody else's brothers. Fantastic.
Well, if you remove morality, it can be anybody, really, right? I mean, that's the thing. Once you start moving away from taboos and morality and things like that.
But Lucinda, we've got to make the business work. That's the only principle here. It doesn't matter about morality, but the business has to work. Can the business work if the brothers?
There are plenty of pimps who run gangs of women who sleep with, you know what I mean? It's if you're using violence and coercion to run a brothel, then you get all kinds, and you remove morality. Then you get child prostitutes, you know, I mean, this is the real world, right? You get child prostitutes, you get queerness, you get all kinds, you get all tastes catered to, right? That is, once we're moving, you know, if we're not situating this in a temporal time or matriarchy or patriarchy so much, and if we're talking about it as removed from morality and taboo,
Joe wanted to speak. Okay,
sorry.
More of a question, really. Sorry, I know this is going back a little bit, but then when we said that the capital was women, is the assumption we're making then that the sexual preferences are heterosexual, and therefore in this family business it would only be the women who would be the capital? Or are we misunderstanding something here?
Yes, some question.
Nice point.
That's a big and important question. Does anybody want to say anything? You're going to take that over, Chris, or somebody else?
Okay, just to say, humans come in two kinds, but biologically. One kind gets pregnant, the other kind doesn't. I mean, that's a very, very, very basic thing, regardless of your sexual orientation. And the argument here is that women will do better with childcare, with the cost of childcare, if they get help. And they can get help from their mum if they live with their mum. And if they are living with their mum, they can get help from their sisters. But getting support in meeting the cost of childcare is a pretty critical thing. And that is going to be fairly basic when it comes to the sexual division of labor. Males don't have children, they don't do breastfeeding, but you can still make use of them. by getting them to do some hunting and bring back the meat. And you can get them motivated to do that by making it pretty damn clear that if they want sex, they better behave and do just that. And then your next move is, but supposing that some of those males throw their weight around. Now, although we're trying to be we're not, as Lucinda was saying, we're not specifying a particular place. We are saying this is early human kinship, and we are saying these people are hunters and gatherers. So if we're going to locate all this back then, before there's even any money, we can kind of work out, well, all right, supposing the women do need security and they follow John's recommendation and draw on their brothers for support. So the modern analogy would be that, I don't know, some kind of strip club with bouncers on the door. The bouncers can be, you can see that from the women's point of view, you want the bouncers to be your brothers. So they don't have to be biologically your brothers, but the critical point is you want them to be not part of the problem. You want them to be part of the solution to the potential of harassment and threat. So the one group you absolutely can't contemplate having sex with or treating as punters are the bouncers, are the brothers. So can you see, Lucinda, you're going to generate the incest taboo from that situation, because women can't afford. As soon as you start letting your brothers and sons, be the punters, they're the problem now. And where's the solution? Well, you've got to write another category.
I understand that, but it's like, but then we're dealing, I understand that, and that we're dealing with a specific situation, right? So we are dealing with certain forms of, or already with a framework, right? And we're dealing with a framework that comes with certain assumptions, right? So we can't move ourselves away from all the assumptions.
Well, not all of them.
We're also talking here a situation where women have where women's sex is seen as power and they're not just subjugated. So I think those kinds of situations are going to be very dependent on environment as well, right?
Lucinda, if there's too much male dominance and violence, that you're not going to be around the next generation. Women have to have high quality childcare, lots of support, lots of solidarity. You're going to get to something like matrilocal residence, matrilineal descent, simply by the assumption that the group's going to be, as I said, a successful family business. It's going to still be around.
Two of the things I return to when thinking around these kinds of things, right, where people tend to think about humanity in these very binary ways, is thinking about the differences between how chimps manage their culture and how bonobos manage their culture, right? So you have patriarchal and matriarchal management systems, right? In nature, even though there's a lot more unrecognized matriarchal power that goes on among chimps. They're still seen as being a male-dominated species, even though I would actually think that females have to have much more power.
Male-dominated. With a lot of risk of infanticide.
Yes, but also there's all kinds of much more subversive social power that female chimps use. So it's actually exceptional that extremely violent male chimps end up as being leaders simply because everybody else gangs up on them, right? And they get refused sex and various other things. So they have to be extremely strong to be able to dominate in that kind of way, because chimps still have social organization and cooperation.
Political alliance rather than yes.
Anyway, that's getting off track, but I just wanted to give an idea of where
Amy was asking a question or going to contribute, but she's just gone.
Where's Amy?
Oh, she went.
Really?
Oh, Amy, did you want to chip in?
Sorry, I had to turn off the coffee. I'm just wondering if to both stay true to the model, but be a little more expansive, if the capital could be redefined not as people's bodies, but as the exchange of the experience of sexual pleasure and the potential for reproductive sex. As opposed to the capital being the women or the women's bodies. Isn't the capital the exchange of an experience of pleasure? Isn't that
what you're ultimately defending when you need to defend it? when it comes down to brass tacks and you need to defend the resources and assets, what are those resources and assets?
Yeah, they're embodied. Even if we talk about it as pleasure being part of the exchange, you're still talking about embodied pleasure. So it still always returns to the body in some way.
Can I suggest that we move on one step? So we've said who are the punters, and they're not your brothers. Is everyone fairly clear about that?
I have two questions about the entire model we're working on today. One is, do we assume that women want to have to get pregnant and have the babies, and do we assume that they want to raise the children? Because someone has to explain the different decisions between men and women. Let's suppose that these are the two groups. So why don't men want children in their lives unless they are forced to? And why do women are assumed to want children in their lives as if something natural to them?
Well, we were just mentioning chimpanzees and bonobos and early hominins, and the fact is that females do tend to get pregnant and males don't.
But, you know, I mean, the question is about the decisions, because if we are talking about a brothel right now, we have creatures that make decisions about themselves. So there is one decision in either side of the groups that is not contested, like the decision of women to have the children and the decision of men not to have them.
Well,
So,
I mean,
so Irene, how can the women decide not to have children unless they refuse to have sex entirely?
Well, I suppose that there is knowledge, and there is knowledge. We know
And that is how you get priestess classes.
And this is why.
But I mean, this is an evolutionary situation of early human kinship.
I mean, one of the things we do to predict the moral system, no moral assumptions, just Darwinian fitness. I mean, if people don't have kids, there won't, you know, there's no fitness there at all. You don't exist.
I didn't see there was anything saying men didn't want children. We're assuming that the men who want sex, and just Darwinism, I mean, evolution organizes to have children by making people want to have sex.
I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, it's great to have a really wide-ranging discussion, but we can't have absolutely everything up for grabs. I mean, we are Darwinians in RAG, and we do think we've evolved, and we can't evolve without getting our genes into the future, and which is the definition of fitness. So some things we are saying we don't exactly assume, because they're just kind of the way science works when it comes to human origins. So I'm hoping we can not question really very, very, very basic things of that sort. I mean, you know, we're animals. We come in two kinds, male and female. Obviously, in real life today, especially, we come in all kinds of different identities with nothing to do with, you know, all that. But I still want to know who must always be refused sex in the model. Given that, according to John, I think it's right, women will heavily rely on their sons and brothers as, if you like, you know, bouncers, as part of their defense system. Who must always be refused sex? And I don't know. Yeah. Lucinda, do you want to come in on that one?
I would say probably the people who get refused sex are abusive people within the culture. If you're abusive and you trespass on taboos, then that would be the first group, you know, or harmful.
Yeah,
we haven't got any taboos yet. We're just about to get one.
We've already introduced some areas around taboos, though, because we're already talking about it in just male and female terms and various other things. So
why is that taboos? That taboos in anthropology would be kind of rules that can't.
I'm not an anthropologist, so.
Yeah, but taboos would be rules that can't be violated. I don't think we've quite got any rules in this society yet.
Okay, well, but a taboo, there would be a taboo against violence, one would think, right? I mean, violence.
Yeah,
you
we've
know,
got muscle. We've got muscle. We've got sons and brothers.
I think once you start talking about organized systems and relationships between people, And we've already going, oh, you don't sleep with your brother because of various things and taboos evolved out of that, right? Or maybe vice versa, who knows? I don't. So I think it's very hard to talk about these things from this totally blank slate kind of a way, because we're not talking blank slate. We're talking Darwinian evolution and things like that. And some of these taboos come up pretty around murder and things like that come up very
Listen, there's just one quite simple question. If you're relying on your brothers as bouncers, if you like, is it sensible for the women to allow sex with those people?
I would, that would really depend on a variety of things, I think, right? I mean, part of it would, well, I don't know. I will very much say
there's in the chat, Bernadette had another suggestion. So who should be refused is people who don't pay up, whatever we think of as paying up.
Yeah.
And we obviously, I think we all agree with that. Yeah, we definitely agree with that one. Behaving should be refused.
And that does capture exactly what happens with bride service. The guys who just want a bit of sex and aren't prepared to go hunting and be generous with the meat they bring back, they're going to be out. So that does absolutely,
that is true
with ethnographic reality. And I think we can I think it's true to say we can generate it. We're not just copying what we find in the ethnographic record. We're seeing the underlying logic that gets you to that, which would be.
But the question of who's always going to be refused.
I'm going to suggest that the best theory we have for the emergence of exogamy or the emergence of a taboo on incest is that women need their brothers to defend them. And as soon as you start letting your brother have sex with you, then they're no longer the solution to harassment. They are part of the problem. And it makes a lot of sense for women to keep two categories of males, one their brothers, one the people they can have sex with. It just makes a huge lot of sense for women to do that. And I know there's a huge dispute about it, and I know some people think that we have the incest taboo because if you have incest, you're going to have kids with 2 noses or 5 ears or something. Those arguments don't really work very well because male chimpanzees are constantly trying to have sex with their younger sisters and relatives, including daughters. The females resist it, but I mean, you never end up with a nice, proper taboo the way human hunter-gatherers have. And it seems to me that this model kind of gets you to that, to an actual taboo on sex with your brothers. Just makes no sense for women to allow that.
So that actually is an initial taboo. We've actually generated a taboo, if you like.
Yeah.
From having no taboo.
So who gets people pregnant? Again, I know it's a little bit repetitive, this, but it's like saying, do you let brothers maybe have sex now and again just to get you pregnant? And it just, again, as soon as you ask that question, it seems to be a no-brainer that it's going to be the punters that get you pregnant.
To some degree, doesn't it give more power to the women if the men don't know who their children are?
Well, we'll get you to that. The next question.
Right, next question.
You're absolutely spot on, right, Lucinda. You're completely correct on that. There's a huge, lovely lot of literature on.
The big question: are men allowed to know they're the fathers?
Okay, so all right. So who gets people pregnant, and then do you let fathers know? And Lucinda, you are so right. It makes a lot of sense.
What are the options here?
Yeah. Okay.
So the one who brings back the nicest zebra get the female pregnant, doesn't he?
Sorry, say again, Mary?
The one who brings back the best food, the best hunter, get the female pregnant, yes?
Yes. Yeah, he's most likely to get her pregnant.
Sorry.
But we're not saying, are you saying that there's one good hunter who gets all the women pregnant? What are you saying there?
I would say, especially if we're looking at bonobos and chimps, that actually being a good friend to women in other ways than just bringing food can get you a lot of access. As in the real world, just being a decent person can get you a lot of access to, to sex,
but
right?
Is that true of hunter-gatherers?
Think of the mother-in-law, but think of the hunter-gatherer mother-in-law. Does he
Who
want
is actually the boss of this management?
Right. Good point. Good point.
He's not interested in her daughter having a nice sexy time with somebody who plays nice music. He's going to be a hunter.
But she also might have. But the mother might also have relationships with other people that soften up things and at least give a little bit more privilege, right? Though then again, you're starting to create power dynamics that would probably want to start to get rid of if you're trying to have an egalitarian sort of society.
Have we answered this question? Do you let fathers know? Because Lucinda's given a nice, clear answer. What does everyone else sort of think it's a good answer?
John.
Well, no, obviously not.
Why not?
Well, you want a certain amount of ambiguity and keep the men tame. They've got to think, well, maybe actually.
Well done.
You don't want them to think they're not dads at all. You definitely want them to feel they're probably dads.
Sure. It's.
But what you don't want to do is to give a punter a claim on a woman. The right to say no whenever you like is absolutely critical to the whole system working. Women have got to be able to say, no, fed up with you, go away, I want somebody else. And if you let a man know for sure he's the dad, he will use that as his reason for sticking around and say, you can't get rid of me because, your baby's, I'm its dad.
Maybe he'll even think, oh, well, why don't we go somewhere else to be nice and private? Or something like that. He might make claims of that kind.
So
would you also include the danger of another male knowing that that's the child of another male and infanticide coming through that? Is that a human issue as well?
Yeah,
like among chimps, chimps, that's where the infanticide's coming through. So child defense would be making sure that another male doesn't know that's for sure that person's son.
Quite right.
Just to say, I mean, we actually have a lot of fairy tales more about evil stepmothers because more women died in childbirth. But there are plenty of tales of humans trying to kill the children of other humans that were not their own, right?
Yeah. But obviously, in this model, women have got no interest in allowing any such thing, and it's far better if nobody really knows for sure who's the dad. If you just confuse.
But you want the males to have the feeling they're probably the dad.
Yeah.
Quite possibly the dad, which means they're not going to do harm to the children.
And by the way, that is now very standard human biological theory with Sarah Hrdy, with paternity confusion and all the stuff about paternity, about partible paternity that in South America, Paul Valentine and Steve Beckerman and stuff. I mean, it's really well recognized now that where women do have solidarity and power, they kind of keep the men guessing. You don't want them to think they're not the dad, because then they're not going to be so keen on helping provide. But you don't want a man to know this kid is mine and this kid isn't, for the reasons Jacob's suggested, because then that's just going to cause, that's just going to cause problems. And yet, of course, that does go against what has been up to now the sort of dominant paradigm, the idea that no male, talking about human evolution, no male's going to be providing food for a female unless he's given paternity certainty. For decades, that was the idea, but I think it's been pretty heavily smashed on its head now by mostly female paleoanthropologists these days. Sarah Hrdy, the leading figure.
Bernadette, you're saying something about resource hoarding or not resource hoarding. Don't know if you want to clarify that. So I mean, but with egalitarian hunter-gatherers, they are very.
Yeah, I'll see if I can speak for a tiny bit. Just saying that a man basically securing just one woman for himself, that will be resource hoarding, and what you're saying is trying to avoid that level of resource hoarding for all parties. So everything is shared. So that was just my suggestion.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the good thing about the brothel model, even calling it a brothel to start with, before we sort of turn it all on its head, is that it does make absolutely sure that the men can't accumulate property because they've got to keep on surrendering it, even to be having their position as a bridegroom, even to have to have any sexual relationship. They've got to keep surrendering their meat, which is the only property they're likely to have, to their in-laws. So a kind of logic of sacrifice. I mean, actually, religious sacrifice ultimately comes from that point. You have an animal and you kill it and you offer it up, and then hunter-gatherers, you offer it up to your in-laws, your mother-in-law especially. But that's how and why immediate return hunter-gatherers are immediate return, is because there's no chance of accumulating property because it keeps getting taken off you by your in-laws.
Yeah, there's a real opposition to any form of accumulation because it threatens egalitarianism. Yeah. So meat gets taken off the hunter straight away, and nobody's allowed to accumulate or store.
Right. Now, I want to get through all this. We've done Do You Let Fathers Know, and I'm really pleased that people are fairly happy about the idea that you keep things a bit confused there. Who do the children belong to? Again, that really is a no-brainer, it seems to me. But let's have a go, everyone. Who do the children belong to?
Mothers.
I would say the community.
The community, yeah.
Yeah, but does the community include the punters?
No, it's the mothers.
Well done, John. You're thinking straight.
It's kind of the brothel, isn't it? It's
the community.
Those children are the next generation of workers and security.
Yeah. So the children belong to their mothers, and of course, therefore, to their mother's brothers. So, and that gets you to the avunculate, which is a critical feature of kinship in traditional societies right across Africa and really pretty much everywhere. So children do not belong to their dad, and the dad doesn't even know for sure that he is the dad, and he's encouraged not to care too much. But brothers feel that their child is sister's child. And again, you can sort of, I hope you can see that that's just kind of logical. It's in women's interests, because you never have an ex-brother. A brother is for life. So the children are never going to be let down by the fact that dad's walked off. Brother doesn't walk off. He's your brother. And so the kids have got almost like two parents who can't be divorced because they're brother and sister. It's a very, very, very excellent system.
I have a question. Would most men be somebody's brother?
Yes.
Would there be in-groups and out-groups of men, or would just all men be part of the in-group by being somebody's brother?
Well, at the very end of the questions, we said, how many of these institutions do you need? And the answer would be, I think, we'll get there in a minute, but...
Well, what is the answer? How many institutions do we need?
Well, the minimum is, I won't say it. No, somebody else say it. The minimum number of institutions.
There's got to be at least two.
Two. Thank you, Anne. Yeah, thank you, Anne.
There might be 4, there might be 8, there might be, but there's got to be at least 2.
And when you have 2, it's known as a moiety system. And if it comes out of the logic we've been exploring here, it will be 2 matching moieties, rather like the canela, the great big wheel of a society in highlands of Brazil. You have the people of the West, the people of the East, all the women on one side are sort of kin to each other and share their children and stuff, and the men crisscross to and fro from side to side between sisters and wives. But even the word wife isn't really very good, because no man ends up with conjugal rights in his wife. He has to keep on providing meat, and so you get this lovely system of exchange between the two halves. So everyone's a brother, but the brother to one side of the camp is like the groom to the other side, like the women in the other side. Everyone has these 2 opposite roles, and you crisscross, alternating. You sort of, you kind of die as a husband and come alive as a brother. You die as a brother and come alive as a husband. And all the myths describe those experiences of to and fro alternation between opposite kinship roles.
That would add another layer to the incest taboo, because you would need the brothers to go hunting to contribute to the out group to make the system work. So if the brothers are freeloading, then the whole system breaks down.
Exactly, Jacob. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Shall we move on a bit? So is descent patrilineal or matrilineal? Again, it's a kind of no-brainer.
Mm.
Oh no, sorry, I missed one out. Sorry, Camilla. Okay, is residence patrolocal or matrilocal?
Residence and then descent.
Sorry, love. Sorry, Camilla. Yeah, I've got it wrong. Jumped ahead to one stage too quick. Is residence patrolocal or matrilocal? Where would it make sense for women to reside? Do you go off to wherever the punters come from and live with him, or do you stay with mum?
You would stay with mum, obviously.
mum.
That's how you maintain your power.
Of course, Lucinda, of course.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, you do. Because the wonderful thing about modern science, particularly modern genetics, is that it can give fairly definitive answers to these things. So in Africa, where we evolved, you have farmers, cattle hunters and stuff, and you also have hunter-gatherers. And right across Africa, where you have hunter-gatherers, women have been living with mum, living with mum, living with mum, right down the generations. And it's shown by the mitochondrial DNA, which clusters in little localized groups, whereas the men move around all over the place. And with the cattle herders, it's the opposite way around. Men live with dad down the generation. So it's the nuclear DNA variants that are localized. So we now know
Y chromosome.
the Y chromosome. Sorry, more accurately, yes, that's right. So which is of course transmitted through males. So this is proven. We don't quite know how far in history that goes back, but it's proven that women living with mum is the original system for anatomically modern Homo sapiens living in Africa.
Very likely.
I mean, that's a little bit of probably a slightly too strong.
No, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but there's a strong suggestion.
I realize that it's too strong a claim because the genetics can't take you back more than a few thousand years. But a few thousand years means 8,000-10,000 years, I think, in Africa. So that's not too bad. Living with mum is very, very, very important for a woman, because if you're living with your mum, you'll be living with your sisters as well. And those are the most reliable sources of childcare support. And when you have mum and sisters around you, you've now got a coalition which can provide leverage on the men in your life. So if the men in your life are being useless, you can rely on your mum and your sisters to put some pressure on him to buck up his ideas, or else he's out. So
the other aspect of it that rises up to my mind anyway is that if we're thinking about women as capital in this scenario, and that's the premise we're going from, then why would you send your capital off somewhere else anyway? I mean, that would be
exactly. Right? Don't make any sense at all. You
Beautiful.
use your brothel. If you want to keep your brothel going, you got to have them. You got to keep them.
We mustn't forget to end up with working out about these terms, brothel and so on, working out why they're completely upside down. But don't worry, we'll get there. So so now we've done residence, and it's going to be obviously in the women's interest to stay with mum and sisters and brothers. And now is descent. Descent, of course, is not quite the same as residence, but there is usually a connection. How is descent reckoned? In other words, we know who children sort of belong to, but down the generations, where do children belong to? What
defines who belongs to the group?
Yeah. Again, it's a kind of no-brainer. Come on, somebody. John, tell us.
We can't hear.
It has to be the mother.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
So you belong to the maternal ancestry.
You can't imagine. You can't imagine letting the punters, have your children pass on stuff down there through father to son. It doesn't make no sense in terms of everything else.
If the men don't even know if they're fathers, and you can't have patrilineal descent anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't make any sense.
Who distributes the income and among whom? Now, we're talking about hunting and gathering. So primarily, we're talking about meat. I mean, of course, women get probably the bulk of the food with hunter-gatherers comes from women rather than men, but the meat is very much valued by both sexes, and particularly by the women. And so how is it distributed, and who does the distribution?
I would suspect the grandmothers in that particular situation.
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, it's no question about it. At the end of the day, it's grandma who makes the decisions, and she supervises the distribution, and she's in a very good position to make sure that the distribution is pretty much egalitarian. She's kind of out of the system in some way. She's above it all. She's got a lot of power and authority. Maybe 2 or 3 grandmothers in a little camp, fairly big camp, I suppose you'd have to have. But anyway, she is ultimately.
Lots of camps will have 2 or 3 grandmas or aunties.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Good. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
But who is that meat actually going to?
Yes. Good question. Yeah.
Really, who has rights in it? Let's put it that
So
way.
does the meat go back to the punters, or does it get distributed quite differently? So
No.
is that Anne Keeley?
Okay. No, the punters aren't likely to see very much.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, you might be nice to a man. You might let him have a bit of food or something, but really, he's got rights back with his own mum. He's got rights in children, rights in food that's coming in, obviously from, husbands marrying in from outside. So when it comes to rights, a man does not have rights of any kind: sexual rights, religious rights, where you have some kind of ritual and cosmological tradition, or rights in food. His rights belong, with his kin, back with his mum. But so he's kind of always on sufferance. I mean, obviously over time, people get very fond of each other, and their older men are very, very affectionate and loved by their in-laws, so all sorts of things start to change a bit. But technically, a man's rights are with his blood, with his kin, and not with his wife, or certain. I mean, the idea of a man having any rights in his mother-in-law, she is absolutely tabooed and sacred. She is absolutely almost like God, the mother-in-law. She's just the one to whom all obedience is owed. Up until now. And so we have all these stories about mother-in-law avoidance. They're very logical, these rules, that you mustn't even meet. If a young man in among the Navajo and so many other tribes, so many other groups, you meet your mother-in-law along some path, you just got to get the hell out of there. You just mustn't be seen anywhere near, let alone look at the face of your mother-in-law. It's like looking at the face of God. I mean, it's just, don't do that,
With the Hadza, a man, if his mother-in-law comes and approaches where the fire is, he's just got to skedaddle. He's just got to go out the way. And often, if we wanted to talk to a particular young man or hunter, the mother-in-law would have to move out of the way to allow him to approach. As a special
there are all sorts of funny stories, particularly in Australia, about naughty mothers-in-law. So I mean, if you want something that your son-in-law's got, you just go near him and he has to run off, and then you take whatever you just tuck into whatever you just steal it, because he's just going to run off. So these privileges can be abused by rather naughty mothers-in-law. And all kinds of jokes about all stories and stuff. Yeah. Right. Okay. What's other?
We've answered how many establishments. We've agreed about that.
Yes. After that, how many different establishments are needed? There's actually a slightly different and difficult question. It's not quite.
It is a tricky question, and it's where we get the next main rule.
Yeah, so can a punter gain access to his own daughter? Can someone explain to me why that's even a question? Because obviously we would say, well, no way, it's his daughter, but we're not supposed to be making moral assumptions.
Well, the men aren't supposed to know.
And the men aren't supposed to know anyway, exactly.
So how does that work?
So yes, exactly, yeah.
So what do we do about that?
I hope people can at least see that there is a problem there. Because his daughter is in the other group. She's not his blood.
He will be visiting the brothel where his daughter is.
That's right.
So what do you do about that?
I mean, you could argue, well, let's not bother about it. But who's going to be most worried about it? Who's likely to be most bothered about the guy she's having a relationship with, adding to his relationship, extension of that sexual relationship to your daughter?
It would be the mother who would know.
That's it. That's it. Can you see that from a woman's point of view, she's having sex with a man, okay, and he's having to earn his keep. He's having to, provide. Now, is it in her interest, that woman, to allow him, in addition to having sex with her, to add her daughter? I mean, you can immediately see she's going to put her foot down. I mean, no way, because it completely undermined the mum. So the mum and her sisters and her generation of women, plus brothers, of course, will have every interest in preventing any such extension of the relationship, despite the sort of logic of the kind of kinship categories to which people belong, which might allow. And by the way, when you find those who spent their lives studying matrilineal, matrilocal societies have always said there's a strange difference. I mean, fathers most definitely are not allowed sex with their daughter, but it's a different name is used for that kind of that abuse, that crime, from having sex with somebody within your own blood. That's a more sort of cosmically prohibited form of incest than sex with his daughter.
He talked about it with the Trobriand Islanders, with the Trobriand matrilineal clans. It was perfectly entirely possible that a father and a daughter could have sex, but there was a sort of name, it was thought of as something quite crazy and mad and weird. But it was different from incest inside the clan. So he made that very clear. And also, what is it that the mother, I mean, the mother's obviously bothered about, but what does she want? What does she want for her daughter? Who's she expecting her daughter to link up with? Just from a purely economic point of view.
A good provider, a good hunter.
Yes.
And what sort of, and more than a good, yes, a good provider, but can we describe
Loyal.
this?
A loyal?
Ideal, you what?
A loyal hunter?
Loyal, but anything about in relation to her daughter? Does she want a good hunter provider who's like the same age the mother is?
Oh, so it needs a similar age to her, to the daughter.
What, the mother? I'll clarify.
No. So the daughter would have a kind of younger man.
Yeah. She wants new, fresh blood from a young generation of hunters. So the next rule that should be developed will be something about men and younger women of different ages shouldn't be having sex. So there'd be some sort of age set on it. Yeah.
Just to say, when we were developing, I mean, just to say to everybody, we started developing this model in about the year 2000, about the turn of the century, because one of our students, Ana Lopez, wanted some kind of advice. She loved the whole theory of the sex strike and all that, and wanted to know how to sort of put it into practice. And she ended up forming the International Union of Sex Workers with our support. And we were very pleased because we actually, for the first time, managed to get the General Municipal and Boilermakers Union. And in our case, it was the London Entertainment branch that I was a member of, and so was Camilla. For the first time, when a pole dance, worker or some other sex worker, usually it certainly wasn't street prostitutes, they were very difficult to organize, but all kinds of other sex workers were for the first time admitted into a TUC affiliated union, the General Municipal and Boilermakers Union. And previously, when somebody working in a gentleman's club had got fed up with management and wanted to join a union, the union would just say, "Go off, you shouldn't be doing this work." So we were very pleased with that, and the union is sort of, as far as I know, well, firstly, it kind of spread. We linked up. Camilla was very involved in it. Linked up with the Red Thread and various other unions in New Zealand and around the world. And so, sex workers these days, at least technically, do have a right to join a union. And then the second sort of influence on all this model was Wendy James, Professor Wendy James of Oxford University, when we had a workshop in Wales on early human kinship. And she suddenly realized that everything we were talking about in this experiment, this thought experiment, was pretty damn close to the group that she'd spent decades studying in Central Africa, where they developed this.
The Uduk in Sudan.
In Sudan.
The Uduk in
Yeah.
Sudan.
In Sudan, yes, and they had an age grade system of just the kind Camilla was mentioning there. I don't know if you just want to say a bit more, Camilla, about that.
Well, she just, so the Uduk have strong matrilineal, matrilocal links with a lot of ideology of the moon as well. We're just going to come to the calendar bit, but they're typically East African systems with these quite marked age grades, so that whole generations of men who might be initiated or women who might be initiated, if you are the generation above a cohort below, you don't have, you cannot, it is a matter of huge abuse for an older man to try to have sex with a daughter who's in the daughter generation. Whereas grandparents can skip the generations. They are often known as joking relatives, but because a man would be so much older than the young girl, it's kind of a joke. It's not reality. So the age grade system really prevents that sort of abuse. So
the age grade system is constructed by having initiation rites at quite long intervals between them, so that everyone initiated in that say decade, and then a decade later or so, perhaps even more. I can't remember the exact dates, but it's long intervals between initiations, mass initiations, which constructs these age sets.
It's most prevalent among pastoralists, really. That sort of big long age set. John.
Well, I'm looking at the problem of the 18-year lunar cycle, and whether do you think that was used as a generation mark? It could have been divided into two. You could have had a 9-year cycle and then another 9-year cycle. That might be a way.
Very interesting to look at pastoralist calendars, because there might be something to it, but I doubt that hunter-gatherer ones would be.
No, sure. This is pastoralist. This is, but I was just wondering whether a similar pattern could be read in to a pastoralist society. These are definitely farmers. These are people with goats.
The Wendy people.
The whole thing, the whole range. Captive animals.
Yeah, Don, it's sort of I have not studied it. It's not part of anything I've written about or published, but I have it strikes a chord when he mentions that kind of period is about right. Some kind of period about 18.6 years or the half of that.
The 9 year, yeah.
That does sound about right for some of these societies. It would be wonderful to start checking that out and find out a bit more about it. But it strikes me as very plausible.
Yes, sorry to divert.
Yeah. Right, we're nearly finished. Predict the clock or calendar. When do you close for business? When do you open again? What happens during your time off? So I don't know. We now have to think that humans do come in two kinds, only one of which gets pregnant, but also there's a periodicity to that. The human female has a cycle which we call a menstrual cycle. Chimpanzees sort of have a menstrual cycle, but it's 36 days, nothing like lunar. Bonobos have a cycle as well, but it's 40 days.
We haven't clarified. What happens for women who are pregnant? What happens for who's doing the work here? Who's doing the sex work exactly?
Yes. Sorry, Camilla, you're quite right. That's a silly thing that in the questions it's not in there.
I don't know quite why. It's usually it comes up in the discussion, but maybe we can work it out with this.
It's absolutely critical. Sorry, it's absolutely critical. Of course, you know what happens in a modern brothel? I don't know, Amsterdam or somewhere. Of course, you better not.
You don't, Chris. Tell us.
Sorry, you don't know. Well, I've been to Amsterdam. But what happens is, of course, when you get pregnant, you're sort of, you're out of work for a bit, and so our institution that we're talking about isn't going to work because there's nobody going to get into the future. None of your genes are getting into the future if you just get discriminated against because you've got a kid, because you're either pregnant or breastfeeding. That's not going to work at all. So quite clearly, even though, to use the Amsterdam metaphor, the people in the window are going to be not pregnant, there's going to be a co-op. So the different women have got to, obviously, the women in different reproductive states are going to be supporting each other. So, okay, now I'm on the job, and I'll help you, but then our relationship will soon be reversed when I get pregnant, and I hope you're going to support me, kind of thing. So that's going to happen.
So we could get a new rule also, like a postpartum taboo, as a protection for the work. It's like workers' conditions, that after a year or 2 years after birth, they're not having to work.
Yeah,
something like that.
That's very important. Yeah, that's right. And of course, you do get those quite strict rules with hunter-gatherers that men can't just expect sex any old time. I mean, it's quite strict rules about the reproductive fertility status of the woman. Yeah. Do we want to get into menstruation and stuff, Camilla?
Well, how does it affect the situation here with these questions? What does anyone think? We close for business when? When do you open? What do you do during time off?
That's the thing. If it's a brothel, does it not kind of destroy the theory because it would make sense not to have all the women having demonstration at the same time, so you can keep the brothel open at all time.
That's true. If you had,
true.
Well, it's true.
What do you think the brothel workers would think of that?
No, I mean, that is simply saying that
be on a rotation.
No Sundays.
They would be on a rotation, so they might be okay with it because they're not working all the time. But the brothel is sustained all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
The community is sustained.
I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm going to just add the fact that in Africa there are creatures called lions, and the lions are the reason why our species are so social. In other words, Robin Dunbar was able to prove that living in large groups is actually all kinds of benefits, of course, but all kinds of costs in terms of harassment, competition for food, and etc. So why in the end did evolving humans choose to live in pretty large groups? And the explanation he comes up with is predation pressure, particularly big cats in Africa. And so I'm cheating a little bit because it's not purely logical. This is sort of empirical stuff. We now know a lot about lions and their preferences when they like to eat people and eat other animals, and when they're not so keen. And basically, because they've got superb night vision and they're rather lazy animals, they like to just come up behind you and just eat you because you didn't see them. And they can do that around dark moon or the night after full moon when there's an hour of darkness and the lion's pretty hungry because previously there's been a full moon.
So why is this relevant, Chris? Because it would affect the punters are the ones that are walking around.
Well, it's just
it would mean that the brothers are not doing their job properly as well.
Well, it's relevant.
But isn't it the punters who are the problem?
It's relevant because if you've got two institutions, the punters are going to move to and fro. I mean, you've got to move from where your mum and brothers and children are to the place where you're going to get your sex, and if it's back to local residence, which we already think is likely, and so moving around will be safest at certain times of the month and much less safe at other.
John's got a suggestion.
Is it, if this is a night business, then we do it at the full moon because that saves on lighting.
Saves on lighting, saves on being eaten by lions.
Absolutely.
And if it's happening between two groups, minimum two groups, then those two groups have to synchronize with each other. So there needs to be some type of clock.
There's got to be a clock for this, hasn't there?
That both groups can see, and they can't. So it can't be a rotation.
I would suggest that the moon becomes a very obvious thing. If you've ever actually been under the moon or in the night sky outside of city lights or in a dark sky park or something, you become very aware of actually how light it is at night, and how well you can see in a full moon and how you can't see it all when it's a waxed moon, right? So a full moon gives you this opportunity to move around. You can see everywhere except in the shadows. That's obviously why a lot of rituals are based around the full moon for this very reason, because it's a time that humans can be active in the dark.
But there's also a lot of rituals based at dark moon because humans want to gather to be safe from the lions.
Well, I was thinking things more like hunting rituals and things like that, and being out in the world rituals.
The Hadza, the major rituals are dark moon for hunting. They're for the moon that's coming up, because during the moonlight, the hunters want that light to be able to hunt. So the rituals happening with the darkness, and what else will be happening with the darkness? If we're going to synchronize all this,
well, I would assume the sex, right? I mean, darkness would be the time you draw together for protection, but also for dancing, and you need to entertain yourself.
Anybody think differently from that?
We have menstruation at dark moon.
We think it's menstruation, yeah.
Yeah, but then we'd also have the possibility for infertile sex, which gives us a whole diversity of sexual expression that is natural to human beings.
Okay.
Thank God we've got there, Jacob. Well done.
Yeah, but that also raises a whole can of worms there. But yes,
it does raise a whole.
But let's keep to the simple model to start off with.
Yeah.
What do we think is happening when you're on your time off? We think which phase of the moon is time off?
Dark moon.
Yeah, it's daytime in dark room. Daytime and dark moon time. Daytime and dark moon time. You can see to do things.
Yeah.
And
yes, right.
There isn't any party pressure.
Right. Okay. So dark moon, basically time off.
Yeah.
I mean, daytime you may be busy doing preparation and various whatever normal life, but
you'd imagine you'd have the maximum partying, the maximum sort of goings on around full moon, because that's when it's safe. And
partying with the punters,
that's right.
That's
so
with the punters.
You'd expect lots of heterosexual sex around full moon, and then at dark moon, do you just all be very boring together, or do nothing at all, or do you as I think Jacob suggested?
So which is the time of ritual?
Oh yeah, nice.
I don't want to completely.
Yeah, dark moon, sure.
Lucinda was saying we have rituals at full moon, and if you want to call sort of love-ins, honeymoons,
they're different types.
Those would certainly happen at full moon. We know that not just from observation of what happens with hunter-gatherers that we've recorded today, but from all the world's fairy tales. Boys and girls come out to play. The moon does shine as bright as day. I mean, and Malinowski's written about it all. So full moon would be the time for a love-in. The brothel, if it were still using that terminology, would be pretty active. Dark moon is when everyone huddles together with their kin, with their blood, safety in numbers, singing together, in much the way they had to do each dark moon in the ritual called epime, where although people may not all be really kin, they adopt kinship roles with one another. Nobody's sort of formally in a sexual relationship. Everyone's acting for that period as if they were kin, as if they were blood. And so the idea would then be that menstruation would coincide with dark moon, but it doesn't mean that people would not be having some kind of erotic pleasure, because why just be boring? I mean, we call it a sex strike, but sex strike means a strike against heterosexual sex. It doesn't mean you don't do all sorts of other things. And in the West, we're too sort of obsessed with this one thing which we call sex, not realizing, as of course Jacob has rather nicely put it, there's all kinds of other things you can do when you're on sex strike, which are very sexy.
We call it reproductive sex and non-reproductive sex.
I think that's exactly right, yeah.
Perfectly right, which goes back to Joe's question, that we're not just talking about heterosexual sex necessarily at all, potentially.
That's right, that's it.
We can follow some of our bonobo ancestry there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that male primates fight each other for fertile sex. So the thing which is kind of going to be a source of competition would be fertile sex, which of course with humans means sex, around ovulation, which we think would be around full moon. The other kind of sex is going to be probably less a source of conflict and competition, although obviously people still get jealous and stuff when the real attachments are formed, certainly in our society. Yeah.
If we look at bonobos use sex to actually defuse those kinds of conflicts, right? So sex can actually be a source of diffusing conflict as well as creating.
I completely agree with you. Absolutely right. Yeah. There's far too little attention being paid to the bonobo matriarchal cousins of ours, and far too much attention to the wretched common chimpanzees, which so many patriarchs like Richard Wrangham.
Well, it's very hard for us to get away from social Darwinism, isn't it, without giving up patriarchy entirely?
Yes, that's right. It is difficult, and of course, people like, in my view, people like Richard Wrangham are almost social Darwinians. I don't want to accuse them of too many crimes, but they're sort of veering in that direction. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
What's our overall conclusion? Oh, we've just got Dasha. She's only just arrived. What's our overall conclusion about calling this a brothel? Where have we got to? What have we produced in terms of a moral system? What are we actually describing here?
Well, I wouldn't call it a brothel, personally.
And why not? And
because I think there are way too many other social things around it, and they determine too many other social things just to be this kind of thing apart, would be part of my thinking around that. Secondly, it's very hard for me to disassociate the idea of brothel from patriarchy. I know people who work as prostitutes, right? So I understand something about prostitution in the modern world. So it's very hard to sort of just take away, the term brothel has particular connotations that really have to do with patriarchy, right? So once you're starting to change the power dynamics, even if you have a madam in a brothel and it's a little bit more run by women, it's still a very patriarchal power structure. So I think that you sort of, the connotations of power structures in the term brothel are not appropriate for this kind of context. And it's not specialized and everybody's included, right?
Everyone's included, all generations. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Bernadette has a very good point in the chat. I don't know if you can say, Bernadette. She mentions the strong connection between women at the core of the model. Yeah. So the usual depiction of brothels is not of female solidarity.
Can I just say, in my book, Blood Relations, I go into all this quite a lot because, as I said, when I was writing it, the view was that bride service, which is the fundamental economic institution of hunter-gatherers, because they described it as sex for meat, it was described as prostitution. And then, of course, I thought about, well, what exactly is it about actual prostitution today, which gets women who regard themselves as very far removed from prostitution because they're married? What is it which annoys married women about having, say, a brothel setting up down the bottom of the road? And it's just quite clear, it's the divisiveness. I mean, it's that the women who demanded a lot from their guy, real commitment, maybe 5-10 years of commitment, or a huge part of his income, to let him sort of pop down the road and have sex for whatever it is, 20 quid, 50 quid or so, is going to undercut her and devalue her. So the definition of prostitution is that not everyone's involved in it. And as Karl Marx pointed out, you can't really have prostitution without the other side of the coin in monogamous marriage. And what Marx argued is that prostitution is actually the general principle of capitalism. He said sexual prostitution is just a particular expression of the general prostitution of the worker, because who under capitalism does their productive work for love? You don't do it for love, you do it for money. So in a way, I think Marx was saying, don't pick on sex workers as somehow immoral because they don't only do creative, productive social work for money. I mean, that the whole point of capitalism is that, in a sense, we're all, in some sense or another, prostitutes. But it's as actually Lucinda, you were saying, it's that division. So if everyone's involved in the same system and no one's undercutting anyone else, which we've already got to in our model, the idea that it's anything to do with prostitution is just completely absurd. And as I've argued before, it's actually the original root and source of all sexual morality. And actually, it's a more profoundly moral system in the sense that it actually benefits children, benefits childcare, benefits women, benefits both sexes actually, more than any other system known, this matrilineal, matrilocal, moon-governed system that we evolved with. It's the origin of morality.
And it also protects other men from other men, right? Especially because especially if you have men hunting in groups, then it becomes not about raising up one man again above all the others, but about men remain on a more egalitarian level too.
Of course, that's it. The point about when women have got the power of the strike, when they can say no collectively, then men aren't put in a position where, in order to get sex, they've got to fight each other. It's like women are saying, no point fighting each other. Go out, take your weapons, go and find a zebra, kill the zebra, and bring back the meat, and then we'll think about it. It's like, but fighting each other for sex ain't going to work because we decide these things. So women's ability to say no, and that through their solidarity, is actually what generates an egalitarian ethos between men who might otherwise be quite violent towards each other in the way common chimpanzees are.
A comment about undercutting. I think that in terms of, let's say, economic resources or labor offered on the part of women, the undercutting is not done by sex workers. They work much less in all aspects and than the married women, especially those that are married, in a situation that's very patriarchal. They work much less, but let's say the projection in patriarchy is against sex workers, that they are undercutting the value of women because they are doing this work. Although in terms of the economy, it is the other way around. So I don't think. So if we are going to talk about undercutting, we have to think who is undercutting whom and in what ways, like really counting labor hours and types of labor that are offered by each group of women.
Well said, Irene. You put exactly the position which the International Union of Sex Workers put.
And wages for housework. Yeah.
And the wages for housework. And it's kind of it's a little bit like the idea of the Kalahari Sun when Richard Lee said, who's the headman around here? Who's the headman? And one of the elders sort of said, oh, you're going to find everyone around here is headman. Well, each one of us is headman over himself. It's like when everyone's headman, no one's headman. When everyone's king, no one's king. When everyone's prostitute, it absolutely isn't prostitution. It completely cancels itself out. And so you could very strongly argue, and Marx actually did argue, that marriage actually, in other words, a man owning conjugal rights in a woman, is much more the problem than prostitution. But of course, in a way, they're both problematic because they're both head and tail of the same coin.
What have we arrived at? Can we sum up what we've arrived at? If it's not a brothel, what is it? What's our moral system? We've got an incest taboo, we've got an age grade taboo, we've got postpartum taboos, defining kind of workers' conditions. What have we got?
A culture?
But can we be a bit more specific in terms of the social structure?
Female coalition?
Parity, you've got
female coalitions at the root, but what is the
It's fairly egalitarian, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's what?
It's pretty egalitarian.
Yep. Can we actually describe the how do we say it?
Political system? I mean, it does echo a lot of things that anarchy lays out as a political system.
Yeah, it does. Are you looking for a word, a terminology, Camilla?
Yeah, terminology. What have we actually described? We've described a descent system. All these brothers, who are they? I mean, has every woman got a brother? How does this work? What if a woman doesn't have a brother? Her mother didn't have a son. Does she have any brothers to defend her?
Yes, she still does.
So how?
But it's a chosen. I mean, I'm coming from a queer coming from a queer context, I'd say it's almost a chosen family system combined with a descendant one.
Right.
In a way. But I don't know what the technical term for it would be.
We're anthropologists, so how does that work in anthropology?
I'm not an anthropologist.
Well, we're here to.
I'm only the niece of an anthropologist.
We're here to give out anthropology. Leoncia, you know some anthropology. What is it?
I know, but I'm trying to think. It's culture. It's monogamy. It's not monogamy. It's
not monogamy. But how do you have brothers if you don't actually have a real brother? What is
it's
your
a
brother?
Kinship system. It's
what is the kinship?
A blood ideological blood kinship system, I suppose.
There's a technical term. It's called classificatory kinship.
Oh God, yeah.
Classificatory kinship. You've forgotten all your anthropology, Leoncia.
Oh God, come on! It's a long time ago. God.
Classificatory kinship means you step into your sister's shoes if you're a woman. Step into your brother's shoes if you're a man. So if you're a man, your brother's wife is kind of your wife. If you're a woman, your sister child is your child. It's called the equivalence of siblings. So nobody can not have a child because your child is your sister's child.
Nobody can not have a brother or a sister.
And nobody can not have a brother because this sisterhood and brotherhood just stretches all over the place through this simple principle.
And what is that entity in which it stretches? Is an entity that gives it form. What's the word?
Kinship.
It's a clan.
It's a terminology of kinship. It's a clan, which is usually understood as like an imagined ancestor or the descendants of that imagined ancestor. And in this case, the ancestor would be a matrilineal one.
So the clan is a many-headed creature. It's actually the root of the idea of the dragon. It's a many-headed creature, which is kind of many-headed kind of mum who's a little bit gender ambivalent. But I think another word which is useful, which Camilla's been promoting a lot recently, is ruled by the moon, because it really is. It's kind of got everything. It's got the light and the dark. You're gay and you're straight. You haven't got to make all these sort of fixed choices. You're kind of probably encouraged to be a bit straight around full moon, but everyone can switch their gender and identity at dark moon. It just gives you all the different choices available to us as a species, instead of making us pick one of those wretched choices and stick with it as in a kind of prison. So it's lunarchy is freedom. And therefore it's anarchy, as Lucinda said, But it's kind of organized anarchy.
It's very organized anarchy. It's organized by the moon. No one rules but the moon.
Anarchy as a political system is organized, though. People think of anarchy as chaos, but anarchy is not chaos. It's just having no leaders and affiliation by choice. And your freedom comes from responsibility, not from.
Sorry.
I'm just saying, Lucinda, you're one of us. You're talking to.
Thank you, Lucinda. It sounds great. That is what hunter-gatherers are the living embodiment of. Anarchist systems.
It would be nice, Lucinda, if you'd hang around a bit with us. I mean, and I'd come along again because we're very much on the same wavelength. I'm a libertarian communist, anarcho-communist, communist anarchist, whatever you want to call it. And we're very much, and I know you are as well, we're very much aware of the extraordinary centrality of not just the sun and constellations and stars, but also of the moon in the whole course of actually evolution of life on Earth, but particularly human origins and evolution. The moon is absurdly blotted out of history by patriarchy.
Well, and being blotted out of the sky to some degree. I really think that people are losing a sense of who we are because we can't see the night sky. It sounds a little bit phantasmagorical to say, but having had that experience, my brother lives right next to a dark sky park in Australia, and having had that experience of being out in nature in the wild, in that kind of darkness, in that kind of real darkness, which I don't even remember from seeing as a kid, really emphasized for me how intricate, when you can feel like you can reach up and stir the stars with your hands, you have a very different sense of where your place is on the planet and in the universe, I think. And I think we've lost that.
It's probably too late, isn't it, for me to read out this thing about the Sharanawa?
Yeah,
it is.
I don't know, how long would it take? Like 5 or 10 minutes?
Take 6 minutes. Do people want me to?
It's a real ethnography of sex for meat, and it's amazing.
Yeah,
Read it.
Yeah. So
Close to your mic.
This
Read
is
it by who?
all right. This is the Sharanawa of Peru. They have two basic patterns of hunting. In the first, each man decides for himself whether or not to go hunting. He usually hunts alone and brings the game back to his own household. At times, however, when there's been no meat in the village for 3 or 4 days, the women decide to send the men on a special hunt. They talk together and complain that there's no meat and the men are being lazy. In contrast to the first pattern, during a special hunt, the young men go hunting as a group. The special hunt is started by the women. Early in the evening, all the young women go from house to house singing to every man. Each woman chooses a man to hunt for her, a man who is not her husband, nor of her kin group, though he may be her cross cousin, her husband's brother, or a stranger. The men leave the following day and are met on their return by a lineup of all the women of the village, painted and beading and wearing their best dresses. Even the older men will not face this line without game, but if unsuccessful, they beach their canoes and slink to their households by a back trail. The choice of partners is usually a choice of lovers, and many partnerships are maintained for years. I mean, I could carry on reading a bit longer. This is just a gorgeous example of the theory that I developed all those years ago, based actually initially pretty much entirely on this wonderful example in this book called To Hunt in the Morning, which is, of course, a phrase from Karl Marx, how communism will be a place where you hunt in the morning, you guard in the evening, and you do critical criticism in the evening. In other words, we're free to do all kinds of different things. It's a beautiful book, but the critical point is that the women, by going on strike, forming a kind of picket line, but being sexy, they dress up in their finest dresses, the finest costumes. When the men come back and they haven't caught anything, they just don't know where to put themselves. And actually what happens is that the women start muttering and muttering and muttering. When the babies start saying, well, there's no meat there, the women say, oh, let's go and eat penises. You know, there's no meat around, we'll eat some penises.
They're doing it while they paint their faces. Let's paint our faces. There's no meat. Let's eat penises. They're saying the painting the face and eating the penis is the same thing.
So it's a huge pressure on the men as a collective to go hunting. And can you see what's happening? It completely cuts across monogamy. You mustn't have as your lover your husband. You must choose somebody else. Keep the men on their toes. Keep them out, you know. So anyway,
they are asserting the classificatory principles in that special hunt. They don't have their husband. It's their husband's brother or one of his classificatory kin.
So there you are. That's the system in real life, and it's like when Janet Siskand went there, she thought, I've been to the future, and it worked. It worked. So somehow, in some dialectical way, not the John Zerzan way, I don't think, not going back to bows and arrows, but in some other way, if there is a future for humanity, these hunter-gatherers are living there, and we need to join them. Anyway, I think that's it. Is that right? Actually, this turned out to be a bit of a disaster to start with. Didn't work at all with the breakout rooms. Everyone was refusing to put the microphones on.
Yeah, it was a good discussion, I hope.
I think thanks to those, half a dozen of you who really participated, it's been really actually brilliant, a really brilliant discussion. So thank you a lot.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just to mention, next week, Chris is going to do another session. And again, it's working with a myth, a South American myth of Tucano people, the hunter Momaneki and his wives. And this is again a real discussion of kinship and its impact on women. So it's a myth about kinship and marriage. We'll try and do it as a group again, trying to kind of decode its structure, but Chris will introduce the story. So it has a relationship with today's discussion, but it takes it to a real, genuine, Amazonian story.
It's one of the key myths of Claude Lévi-Strauss's 4-volume massive life's work called Mythologique. It's a study of 1,000 North and South American myths. And the hunter Melmenic and his wives is one of the myths that Lévi-Strauss analyzes. Okay, see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Very much.
Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone.